I never thought I would find myself in a situation like this. It was July 4th, 2019, and I was a 21-year-old male working the night shift at a maximum security prison in Kansas. The facility housed some of the worst criminals, murderers and rapists, all under one roof. On that particular day, I had spent my evening celebrating the 4th of July with my family. We grilled food and set off fireworks while enjoying a few drinks. My girlfriend urged me to call in sick and take the night off. I brushed her off, thinking it would be fine to go in. Little did I know how wrong I was. After I dropped my girlfriend off at home, I headed to the prison, about an hour away. The drive was somber, with fireworks lighting up the night sky. I felt a pang of regret about missing out on the festivities, but I pressed on. Arriving at the prison, I gathered my equipment and entered the cell house. The inmates were locked in for the night, and the night cleaning crew was busy tidying up. I met up with my partner to get the shift briefing, and everything seemed routine. About an hour into my shift, around 12:30 a.m., another officer joined us. The three of us stood in the officer's station, discussing the lack of activity when we suddenly heard a strange sound. One of the inmates was laughing, a bizarre cackling sound that echoed through the hall. I dismissed it at first, knowing that drug use was rampant in the facility, but curiosity gnawed at me. I decided to investigate. I walked through the cell house, checking on all 200 inmates. Most were asleep, and I found nothing unusual. I returned to the officer's station, where my partner and the other officer asked if I wanted to search any particular cells. I couldn't think of anyone suspicious, so I decided to check again, hoping to catch a whiff of smoke or something off. As I walked down the second-floor cell run, I spotted an inmate acting oddly. He was sitting on his bed, facing the wall, and mumbling to himself. This wasn't unusual. Many inmates had mental health issues. I almost moved on, but something compelled me to pay more attention. When he turned to me and told me to leave him alone, I felt a twinge of irritation. It was now 12:40 a.m., and I decided to have him searched. I noted the cell number, 218, and reported it to my partners. The cell house was laid out so that I could see the first and second floors of the north side from the officer's station, but the south side was hidden from view. It was a typical maximum security layout, and I felt a wave of unease as I walked over to the south side. I waited for the officers to bring the inmate out, but he took his time. He finally emerged wearing only shorts and a durag, which struck me as odd. He had an intimidating build, 6 feet tall and 250 pounds of muscle. I called out to him from the ground floor, offering him some phone time or a chance to check his email. He refused, which was strange. No inmate ever turned down an opportunity like that. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I watched him closely. He remained at the control panel, watching the officers search his cell, and I realized he could easily ambush them from where he stood. It was time to intervene. I ascended the stairs, approaching him with caution. He was pacing now, clearly agitated. I had to assert my authority. When I ordered him to turn around and cuff up, he exploded with anger. I hesitated, then revealed the reason for my demand. The moment I mentioned the cell phone, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. His body relaxed for just a second before he reached for something. I braced myself. Instead of a phone, he pulled out a 6-inch sharpened metal rod, its fabric handle ragged. In an instant, everything shifted. He lunged at me, thrusting the weapon with alarming speed. I had to react. I tried to grab his arm and disarm him, but he was too strong. I managed to block his strikes to my abdomen, but I felt the rod stab into my chest. It was a sudden shock, and I yelled for help. My partner was already reaching for the MK90C spray, a powerful chemical used to incapacitate threats. As I turned to flee, the spray hit me, the inmate, and my partner, all at once. I dashed down the hall gasping for breath and took refuge behind the stair railing. South, one of the officers, had managed to grab the inmate from behind, trying to subdue him. Chaos erupted as the inmate struggled against South's grip. I reached for my shoulder mic, screaming for a level A response. My heart raced as I ran back to assist. Collins, another officer, grabbed me from behind, trying to hold me back. I was about to break free when I heard a crash. Sheffield had body slammed the inmate to the ground, and I saw him cuffing him as the situation escalated. Finally, more officers rushed in, along with a captain and a lieutenant. The lieutenant noticed the blood seeping from my arm before I even said a word. He had me lift my shirt to inspect the damage. I could feel the sting of the wounds as he examined them, and I pressed paper towels to my arm. In no time, I was rushed to the emergency room, where I could finally call my girlfriend and inform her of what had happened. She reached out to my family while I waited for treatment. The doctors confirmed I had been stabbed 4 times. 1 wound on my arm was a through and through, 2 cuts on my hand, and the stab to my chest had narrowly missed my lungs. I had escaped with my life, but the trauma lingered. For 2 days I couldn't sleep, haunted by nightmares of the incident. Paranoia crept into my everyday life, and I felt the need to carry a gun for protection. Afterward, I was forced to resign due to safety concerns. My coworkers began to drift away, leaving me feeling isolated. Only one officer from the facility continued to check in on me, the sergeant who had not been present that night. The situation worsened when I learned that the inmate who attacked me was a shot caller for a notorious gang. Legal proceedings were underway, and I was left to face the consequences of an attack I never saw coming. I moved on with my life as best I could, but the scars from that night remained. I took every precaution, aware that I might cross paths with the man who had tried to take my life. I hoped that, aside from court, our paths would never intersect again. In the late 1980s, my aunt volunteered at a prison, teaching inmates how to read. As an elementary school teacher, she had a genuine passion for education and believed in giving people a second chance. She spent years doing this until one inmate became fixated on her. At first it was harmless, just some compliments here and there, but then he escalated, declaring his love for her and detailing elaborate fantasies about their life together outside prison walls. Concerned, my aunt reported his behavior to the guards. They advised her to stop volunteering there. But my aunt wanted to believe it was just infatuation from a man who couldn't possibly act on it. Life went on, and she tried to move past it. Even though she occasionally received phone calls and love letters from him, she never answered the calls or replied to the letters, convinced that he was behind bars and couldn't hurt her. That belief was shattered when she got the news. He had escaped. She was away at the time, and upon hearing the news, she immediately called the local police. Worried about her safety, she requested that they check her house when she returned. My aunt lived alone in a ranch-style house, and the police conducted a thorough search of the property. They checked the exterior, the basement, and the main floor. Everything seemed secure. Her home security system was intact. To ease her mind, she had a friend stay over that night, convinced they had everything under control. As midnight approached, they were both settling in when strange scratching noises pierced the silence. Alarmed, they called the police again. The officers returned, believing the sounds were coming from an empty bedroom down the hall. They searched the outside of the house and checked the bedroom but found nothing. Around 2:30 a.m., the scratching returned, accompanied by the faint sound of footsteps. This time, the police decided to investigate the attic, a cramped space my aunt used for storage. After crawling through the small opening, they discovered him, crouched behind a box, armed with a screwdriver, a hacksaw blade, and 2 blades from a pair of hedge cutters. He had gained entry by slitting a window screen that led to the attic. The police later explained that he had wandered off the prison farm and hitchhiked to her town. It was the 80s, and addresses were often listed in phone books, so he had no trouble finding her home. I still can't believe how he slipped past the police during their initial searches. The attic window was tiny, and I suspect they ruled it out as impossible for anyone to enter through there. When they conducted their first sweep around 11 p.m., the screen looked undamaged. Despite everything, my aunt still lives in that house. She loves her home and has a resilient spirit. It's a testament to her independence and strength, but the experience changed her view of safety forever. She learned to trust her instincts and always stays aware of her surroundings, even in familiar places. It's been years since that terrifying night, but every so often I can see her reflecting on the ordeal. However, she never dwells on it. Instead, she focuses on the present, ensuring her home remains a sanctuary. In the summer of 2018, I found myself in a long-distance relationship. It wasn't too far, just 4 hours away, but it felt significant. My boyfriend had made the drive to see me during every school break, and he had asked me to visit him at his grandmother's house. I didn't have a car, but I wanted to show my dedication to him, so I decided to take a Greyhound bus to meet him. I was excited at first. I settled into a seat at the back of the bus, hoping to enjoy the ride without interacting with anyone. However, a man in his late 20s or early 30s sat next to me. I put my earbuds in, signaling that I wanted to be left alone. At 18, I was incredibly trusting and often overlooked warning signs in people. I had a tendency to see the best in everyone, even when it wasn't warranted. I figured the man next to me was harmless, so I ignored him and focused on the scenery outside. There was another guy seated in front of us who wouldn't stop talking to himself, facing a girl a few seats away. I tried not to judge. Perhaps he had some mental health issues. I continued to look out the window, lost in my thoughts, until he suddenly turned around and stared directly at me. A chill ran down my spine when our eyes met. There was something unsettling about his gaze. It felt cold and hollow. I took out my earbuds, and at that moment, he shifted his attention to the man sitting next to me. They began talking, and I caught snippets of their conversation. Both were ex-convicts recently released from prison. Despite my instincts urging caution, I dismissed my discomfort. After all, who knows why they were incarcerated? Maybe it was for something minor. I didn't understand the implications of their pasts, especially on a public bus. Suddenly, the man in front of us turned and referred to me as baby. That made my stomach twist. I had heard creepy remarks before, but something about his tone sent a jolt of fear through me. Annoyed, I plugged my earbuds back in, determined to avoid any interaction. At the next rest stop, the bus emptied out for a few minutes. The man beside me got up, and I felt a moment of relief until he asked me to come sit with him to chat. I agreed, thinking I could be friendly without it leading anywhere. He wasted no time telling me about his recent release from prison and how he hadn't seen a woman in a long time. I offered a polite response and inched away from him slightly, but he didn't take the hint. He scooted closer until our legs were touching, and that's when I felt a rush of panic. Before I could react, his hands were on me. He wrapped them around my waist, commenting on how small I was and how long it had been since he had touched a woman. I didn't know what to do. His words felt suffocating as he continued to make unwelcome advances, telling me I should be a model while he groped me. My heart raced as I remained paralyzed in fear, unable to comprehend what was happening. Thankfully, the bus passengers returned. The man who had sat next to me shot a strange look at the guy who was bothering me, and it seemed to prompt him to let go. I scrambled to my feet and took a seat behind him, still unsure of what to do, but relieved to be surrounded by more people. However, the situation took another turn. When the bus stopped again, I felt the need to get off, desperate to breathe fresh air and escape the cramped space. I stood outside, trying to shake off the discomfort, when a girl from the bus approached me. She looked worried and warned me that the guy who had been talking to me had just left in a car, but was circling the building. She had seen him leave and come back multiple times. I felt a rush of fear wash over me. I thanked her for the heads up, then pulled my hoodie on, even though it was sweltering outside. I flipped the hood up to disguise myself and waited for the right moment to get back on the bus, hoping he wouldn't see me. Luckily, I never saw him again. When I met up with my boyfriend, I didn't share the full extent of what happened. I felt embarrassed and ashamed, knowing I had put myself in a dangerous situation, wanting to push the memory out of my mind. But as time passed, I realized that burying the incident wouldn't make it disappear. Looking back, I can see the signs I ignored. I learned that sometimes it's crucial to trust your instincts, even if that means being judgmental. The world can be unpredictable, and not everyone has good intentions. While I can't change the past, I can carry this experience with me as a reminder to be more aware of my surroundings in the future. I was 18 when my family rushed to another state to be with my grandfather. He was being moved into hospice care, and the news hit everyone hard. Without much time to think, I packed my things and joined them on the trip. It wasn't until we arrived at my grandparents' house that I realized my uncle was there too. I hadn't seen him in years, and no one in the family ever talked about him anymore. All I knew was that he had been in prison, though for what, I never asked. At the time, it didn't seem important. All I could focus on was my grandfather and the fact that we were losing him. The day they took him off life support, I stayed behind at the house. Everyone else went to the hospital, but I didn't want to go. I didn't want to see the moment it happened, and I didn't want to break down in front of them. My uncle stayed behind too. He was in the house somewhere, but I didn't pay attention to him. I tried to keep busy. Anything to keep my mind off what was happening at the hospital. After wandering aimlessly through the rooms, I found myself sitting in front of my grandmother's old computer. There wasn't much to do on it, except play this ancient game. It felt silly to play, but I needed something to distract myself. As I played, I started to feel a strange heaviness in the room. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was just nerves, but the feeling didn't go away. It grew worse. I could hear breathing, slow, deliberate. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that it was just the old house settling. But then I felt it, a shift in the air behind me, as if someone had stepped closer. I didn't move. My hand hovered over the mouse, frozen. The breathing continued, soft but heavy, coming from behind me. My back was to the closet, and I couldn't bring myself to turn around. The screen flickered in front of me, but all I could focus on was the sound behind me. Then I heard it. My name whispered from the direction of the closet. The voice was so faint I almost thought I imagined it, but I knew I hadn't. The room felt too still, too wrong. I tried to act normal, closing the game and standing up slowly, careful not to make any sudden moves. I turned and walked toward the door, but something stopped me in my tracks. I heard footsteps, soft at first, then heavier, deliberate. They were following me. I glanced over my shoulder and saw my uncle standing by the closet door. His face was unreadable, eyes focused on me. I didn't know what to think, but something about the way he looked at me set off alarm bells in my head. I turned back toward the hallway, trying to move casually, but he stepped forward, cutting off my path. He stood there, blocking my way out. I didn't say anything. I just stood there. Without warning, he grabbed my arm. His grip was tight and he yanked me toward the closet. I struggled, pulling back as hard as I could, but he was stronger. He didn't say anything, just dragged me closer, his eyes still fixed on me with this blank, almost calculated look. I tried to twist free, but he shoved me toward the closet door. My back hit the wood, and I stumbled, trying to catch my breath. The door creaked open, and I saw the darkness inside. He moved quickly, reaching for the handle, trying to push me in. That's when I panicked. I shoved back, pushing him as hard as I could. For a moment he lost his balance and I took the chance to dart past him. I ran down the hall, my footsteps echoing through the house. I didn't stop, didn't look back, just kept running until I reached the living room. I slammed the door behind me and locked it. My hands were shaking as I backed away, listening for any signs of him following me. But there was nothing. Just silence. I didn't know what to do, and he was still out there waiting. Suddenly the silence shattered. The door rattled violently as my uncle pounded against it, trying to force his way in. I threw my weight against it, screaming for help, but my voice cracked in terror. His fist slammed harder and I felt the door start to give under the pressure. He shouted at me, his voice frantic, desperate. I pushed with all my strength, but it wasn't enough. The door burst open and he stumbled in, his belt loose, pants halfway undone. His eyes were wild, and in that moment I realized what was about to happen. I screamed as loud as I could, trying to push him back, but he was stronger, grabbing me with terrifying force. Just when I thought I couldn't fight anymore, I heard the front door slam open. My father's voice boomed through the house, yelling for him to get off me. Before I could process what was happening, my father stormed into the room and swung his fist. The impact was brutal. My uncle was thrown back, crashing into the wall, blood pouring from his nose. He scrambled to his feet, holding his hands up like a scared child. He began crying, his voice high-pitched and pleading. He kept repeating that it wasn't what we thought, that he didn't mean to do anything. My father stood over him, fists clenched, breathing hard. His face was filled with disgust and rage. My mother rushed to me, pulling me into her arms. I couldn't stop shaking. My father loomed over my uncle, who was now cowering on the floor, tears streaming down his face as he begged like a child. But none of it mattered. My parents were done with him, and so was I. We left the house that night. No one said a word on the drive back home, but the air was heavy with everything unspoken. I couldn't shake the image of my uncle's face, the desperation, the madness behind his eyes. Deep down, I knew this wasn't the first time he'd hurt someone. In the days that followed, the truth slowly came to light. My uncle's dark past was worse than I had imagined. He had been sent to prison years ago for crimes he committed as a predator, targeting children. But what shocked me most was the reason my grandfather had gone to prison years ago. He had taken the blame for my uncle's crime, covering it up to protect him, thinking it would keep the family intact. I couldn't understand it. How could someone protect a monster like that? My grandfather's silence, his sacrifice, only allowed my uncle to continue his twisted ways, hidden behind lies and secrets. Now with my grandfather gone and the truth exposed, it was clear my uncle had never changed. He had simply been hiding in the shadows, waiting for his chance to strike again. The family fell apart after that. No one wanted to talk about what had happened, but the scars ran deep and the silence was deafening. As for my uncle, he vanished soon after. No one knows where he went, and part of me hopes I never have to see him again. But the memories of that night still haunt me. Every time I close my eyes, I see him standing there in the doorway, his face twisted with that sick predatory smile. And sometimes when the house is too quiet and the darkness presses in, I hear it again, my name, whispered from behind the closet, a reminder that some things never truly go away.